Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. And tonight we have Jackson here to talk about the college football playoff rankings. We're also streaming over on Jackson's channel as well, so it should be a blast. We're going to go through the top 25 teams, and these are the rankings that matter. The AP isn't what matters, it is the college football playoff rankings. But what are your first thoughts, Jackson, about the show tonight? Austin, definitely, he's a guy that is very excited about his Louisville Cardinals being at number 11. Will, with Notre Dame, it stinks for him that his team lost. But what are your first thoughts, Jackson, about the show tonight?
I will say I'm not too surprised about Ohio State still being number one because they got the best resume in all of college football. That big win over Penn State, that big win over Notre Dame. We knew that Georgia would be number two. Michigan and Florida State were 3 and 4. That's no surprise there. But some people have said the season is going to start this Saturday for Michigan, as they'll be going on the road to Penn State. And Penn State does not have a good history against top 5 teams, including Michigan, Ohio State. But not saying that Michigan's going to win or lose, but we're waiting and seeing. As for Florida State, they got a big top-notch rivalry matchup against Miami. And it's one of those games where you just throw out the record books. My question is, are we going to be seeing another wide right or wide left this Saturday?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely looking at the rankings at the top, we're going to get all the way through the top 25 teams, but the top 4, it's unchanged, and the top 8 are unchanged. So definitely the voters just felt, looking at these teams, they all took care of business. And you can't really move them when they're all winning. Ohio State, yes, they were losing to Rutgers at half, but then they turned it around and they won the game. And like you said, Jackson, they do have those resume-building wins against Notre Dame, against Penn State, and that is why they're number one. I get that. I do understand why they are number one, because they have those wins. But Georgia, they did get a big win against Missouri last week, and the CFP voters, they like the Missouri Tigers. They have them fairly high in the rankings, so that was a good win for Georgia, and Georgia has looked fairly solid outside of the South Carolina and Auburn games. Every other game, they've looked pretty good. So there's an argument for Georgia to be number one, but I guess the CFP voters just feel that those 2 wins for Ohio State over Notre Dame and Penn State are better than what Georgia has done. But I do think that the gap between Georgia and Ohio State might be a bit smaller this week, even though we don't really know how to calculate that, because that win over Missouri was impressive.
Well, I will say that Georgia-Ole Miss matchup this Saturday is going to be huge for title implications. Now, by that time, Ole Miss may not be able to have a shot at the West Division because Alabama's going to beat the Syracuse of the SEC. But Ole Miss may be trying to be making some history. They may be trying to upset Georgia for the first time in Athens, Georgia since 1996. And they may be trying to get a shot at a playoff berth if they upset Georgia. But as you said on Only Talk Sports, Jeffrey, Ole Miss does not do so hot in the month of November, especially in big games like Georgia.
For sure. It's going to be interesting to see, and definitely I thought they might lose the A&M game. A&M is more talented than Ole Miss, on paper anyway, even though Ole Miss has had more success with Lane Kiffin than A&M has had with Jimbo Fisher. But Ole Miss survived with a blocked field goal at the end, and they were able to beat Texas A&M in the month of November. But to your point, Jackson, like I've said it before, when you talk about Ole Miss, they do struggle in November. But if they are able to beat Georgia, that would shake things up big time, because then Ole Miss would have a shot to maybe crack into the top 4 if they can win out and things can break their way. But obviously, we'll get to where Ole Miss is in the rankings. But it would be big for Georgia to win as well over Ole Miss, because maybe it would get more and more voters on their side that they should be the number 1 team. Ohio State is a lot of people, again, in the rankings on their side with their wins. But Georgia, if they start stacking up some bigger wins like Ole Miss and Tennessee that they got coming up, then maybe Georgia will have a case. But to your point about Michigan, Michigan is number 3 because they have not beaten a big team yet. But that is going to change because this, like you said, this Saturday, they have Penn State on the road. And if they can get that win, that would help propel Michigan up in the minds of fans around college football that they are a really good team, because of the fact you look at Michigan and they are, in most people's minds, they've been the most dominant team in college football, even more than Georgia and Ohio State. but the fact that you have the Wolverines not playing any big opponents, that's why they don't have the resume to be the number one team in the college football playoff rankings. They've been the most dominant team on paper, the way that they've performed against everybody, but they just don't have those resume building wins. So even if they beat Penn State, they're not going to move ahead of Ohio State or Georgia as long as they win. They'll probably stay at number 3, I would think, but that would be a huge win for Michigan, and that would prove legit.
Yeah. Well, I will say, though, that was a big win against Rutgers Saturday night. I mean, Saturday at noon. So, I mean, that was pretty big for the Buckeyes. I mean, I do think that that defense bailed them out for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they did a good job on defense, but also Rutgers just isn't, a really good offensive team either, and that's where their struggles lie. But yeah, it's crazy with, the top 3 teams, like I said, being the same. The top 8 is the same, but we know why Ohio State, Georgia, and Michigan are ranked where they are. It's pretty obvious with the way the committee ranks the teams. But Michigan, they get a big win. That would help their case of possibly able to move up later in the season. Florida State, though, I mean, they're clearly behind the top 3 teams because they just don't have as many, big time wins in conference play because the ACC just doesn't have a lot of those high quality teams. But Florida State, they have the win over LSU, and they did beat Clemson. So those are 2 decent wins. But other than that, they just don't have a lot of other big games on the resume that they've won. And that's why Florida State is at number 4. You have any comment, Jackson?
No comments so far, but for Florida State, all they got to do is win out. They're good to go. But Ohio State, Michigan, it does kind of feel like deja vu could happen again. I mean, if Ohio State, Michigan are unbeaten going into rivalry week, Michigan wins possibly, then we see both of them getting in. Because let's be real, everyone wants to see an Ohio State Michigan rematch.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it would be, big to have it twice in the same season. And it would be better if things stay the way they are. Like if Michigan beats Penn State and obviously they're both undefeated at the end of the season. If Ohio State loses to Michigan, they would have more leeway, you would think, than Michigan would because of the fact Michigan doesn't have that marquee non-conference win like Ohio State does against Notre Dame. Michigan doesn't have that. And plus Michigan being lower in the rankings already. If Michigan loses the game, if things don't break their way, like what if Oregon only has 1 loss, but they went out, or Texas, or even Alabama, that would make things murkier for Michigan. If they had only 1 loss, they could somehow miss the playoff if things did not break their way. So I would say overall that when they do play, it would be better if you want both teams to make the playoff, for Ohio State to lose that game. But it's going to be very interesting for sure. The last undefeated team at the top still is Washington, and they got a big win at USC. I know USC, their defense has been terrible. So bad they finally got rid of Alex Grinch. I talked about that in a short earlier this week. But you talk about Washington's offense. Michael Penix did a great job on that defense, and Washington's defense, it has some flaws. They have not been great on that side of the ball. They did just enough to beat USC on the road and stay in the top 5. But I guess the voters still feel Florida State, just I guess with the win over LSU and Clemson, should be ahead of Washington. But Washington does have a win over USC and Oregon as well. So it's probably neck and neck between the Seminoles and the Huskies.
Well, unfortunately, that non-conference schedule is abysmal for Washington. I mean, Boise State is not – they're not our daddy's Boise State for sure. And Michigan State's been pitiful this season. So, I mean, and we look at Oregon for a moment. They don't really – well, they got that big Utah win. I mean, that helps. But that's about it. Yeah, they beat Colorado, but Colorado's blown up this year. They've blown up after going against the Donald Ducks. And, I mean, Texas Tech, they were looking ahead to Oregon when playing Wyoming. So, I mean – Tech's been a huge disappointment. So, well, Oregon's just going to
agree with that. Texas Tech has struggled in the Big 12, and that has not helped Oregon, with the resume at all.
No. So they better hope Texas Tech upsets Kansas on Saturday, but I don't see that happening. But Oregon, as we know, they got USC this Saturday on Pac-12 After Dark on Fox, more like Big Ten After Dark for the West Coast.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Then they got Arizona State week after. And then there's the Civil War, or as I like to call it, the Gravity Falls Bowl between Oregon and Oregon State. So on Black Friday, that's going to be a good one. But we head over to Texas at number 7 and Alabama at number 8. Texas has the best win in all.
Sorry about glitching out there for a minute.
It's all right, man. So we got Texas.
Yeah, you're right. To go at Texas, they have a really good win. You're right about that. Texas beating Alabama was huge.
Yeah. But even though TCU doesn't look like a big test for everybody, believe me, they were kryptonite for the Texas Longhorns. I mean, ever since TCU joined the Big 12 in 2012, Texas is 3-8 against TCU.
Yeah, that's insane. You talk about a team that's way worse, than the Longhorns on paper year in and year out, which is TCU. And the fact that the Horned Frogs have had that much success against Texas, that's wild. So, definitely Texas cannot overlook that game. But yeah, you are right about Washington. To go back to the Huskies for a second about their non-conference. But in their defense, though, when they did schedule Michigan State and Boise State, those teams were better. To be fair, you can't basically blame them against that.
That's
but
true.
Also they've played who they've played, and at the time that they played them, they weren't good. So, but Washington did beat those teams the way they should, and they do have those good wins against USC and Oregon. But I think Washington and Florida State, it's very close. I guess the LSU wins keeping Florida State ahead, but still, those two teams are neck and neck for that 4th spot right now. And like you said with Oregon, the Ducks just got to keep winning. And I love the Civil War, even though, like you said, the Gravity Falls Bowl. Some people call it, I've seen other names as well. I saw, the Platypus. I don't know what. There's a lot of names for it, but definitely I like the Civil War. But Oregon,
I can't
do
the Perry the Platypus sound, but I'm going to work on that for the future.
Yeah, that's definitely a good voice reference to know. Texas, like you said, they do have the best non-conference win. Getting that big win over Alabama on the road, that was huge, and that's why they're ahead of Alabama. But, I mean, all of these teams in the top 8, they control their destiny. I don't know about you, but in my opinion, any of these teams in the top 8, if they win out, they are in. If Ohio State wins out, obviously they're in. If Georgia wins out, they're in. Michigan, Florida State, Washington wins out, they're in, I think. If Oregon, Texas, and Alabama win out, I feel like they're in. I just think that there will be enough scenarios that would occur based on what these other teams are going to do against each other. I think all of them are in if they win out. Maybe Texas is the weird one because, if Alabama wins out and then they beat Georgia, you maybe think they would leapfrog them. And then obviously, if Oregon wins out and then Michigan always won, maybe Texas could still get out. But I do feel like in most scenarios, Texas would get in. But for Alabama, Oregon, Washington, the top 4, they went out, they're probably good to go. Ole Miss is where it gets interesting because Ole Miss, if they went out and Alabama wins out, Ole Miss would not get in the SEC championship game because Alabama, has the tiebreaker. So I think that Ole Miss would need more help if they won out. They need, more things to break their way. They might fall short at number 5 if they do win out. But Ole Miss is definitely in the conversation, but they have to beat Georgia to have any chance, obviously.
For sure. I mean, they're going to have to get things done against the Bulldogs. But, I mean, we go back to Texas, Alabama for a moment. I mean, we know Texas could beat TCU this Saturday, but what would help Texas and Alabama is if Washington was to go down against Utah this Saturday, and if Oregon was to go down against USC, that would help things for the two, for sure.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I mean, definitely a lot of results are, still going to shake up the race. And in a couple of weeks, these rankings could look a lot different. But then you got Penn State at number 10. And obviously, they do not control their own destiny because they need things to break their way, even if they won out. They need to beat Michigan. And then, I mean, it would be insane if, somehow they could get into the Big Ten championship game. They would need a lot of things to happen for that to happen. Losses from Ohio State and stuff like that. But it's still Penn State. They're not completely out of it, but they do need to beat Michigan to have a shot, and just to boost James Franklin and get more people believing in the Nittany Lions, because no one does. I mean, they believe Penn State is one of those teams that they can beat everybody else, but they can't beat the big teams. And they have a good shot in Happy Valley to get it done against Michigan, but Michigan is a really good team. So that's going to be a big game for sure. But if the Nittany Lions lose, then obviously they're going to be out of the race for sure.
Well, then we get to number 11, Louisville, which they are likely clinching that second spot in the ACC title game, as they have Virginia on Thursday night on ESPN. Next week, they got to go to Miami, and then Kentucky, the Syracuse of the SEC, they're going against on rivalry week. Now, they went out. All they got to do is win the ACC title, and they got a playoff spot coming to their city.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that they can make the playoff if they won out. Things would still have to break their way because they're lower in the rankings, and getting wins over Miami and Kentucky, while they would be good, would not be as good of wins as what some of the other teams are getting toward the top. And then you talk about beating Florida State. That would be a huge win. But would it be enough to get Louisville in the top four? I think they would need multiple teams ahead of them to lose another game, to have 2 losses. Then Louisville could maybe get in the conversation for that 4th spot. But yeah, the fact that Louisville's in the conversation, very happy for Austin's team. I mean, definitely. I was so excited for Austin's team. Mentioned it at the beginning of the stream when I was talking about you, Jackson. I mean, I'm happy for Austin's team. I mean, they're number 11. Yeah. No one thought that they were going to be 8-1. And I mean, definitely they could still slip up against Miami or Kentucky, but
Miami is more likely. Miami is the more likely because, I mean, they're the Jekyll and Hyde team of the ACC. So, I mean,
like
they're fun
as well.
Oh, God. I mean, like they do great against Texas A&M. Then they blow it against Georgia Tech. And then they do magnificent against Clemson. But then they fall apart against an NC State team. But how about Oregon State? They got an interesting scenario. Like, what if they win out? Like, think about, I mean, this week they got Stanford, but look at the last 2 weeks. They got a possible game day trip coming over to Corvallis against possibly unbeaten Washington by that time next week in Cupcake Week. And then on rivalry week, they may be trying to upset Oregon in Eugene on Black Friday. So, I mean, what if Oregon State wins out the rest of the regular season, and then they possibly win the Pac-12 as a way to say adios to the Pac-12? Because we don't know what's going on with them right now, but that's neither here nor there. What do you think, Jeffrey?
I will say to your point, Jackson, that it is interesting because Oregon State has those tough games left that you never know. Maybe they could get back in the conversation. But I will say that the Washington State loss is going to hold them back significantly because Washington State, when Oregon State lost to them, was considered a good team. They were ranked in the top 25, and that was not a bad loss. Now Washington State's fallen off a cliff. They're 4-5, just lost to Stanford. And now Oregon State has that loss on their resume that is a bad loss because they just keep losing. So it's kind of like when you talk about Mark's top 25, it actually makes sense and how wins and losses are reevaluated based on how those teams play. If Washington State keeps losing, it's going to make it look worse and worse for Oregon State on the resume. So even though, like, to your point, if Oregon State can win out and get those big wins, I think they can get back in the top 6. But I don't know if they can get back in the top 4. They would need a lot of things to break their way. And again, that Washington State loss is not helping. If LSU could have won out, they would have had a better shot than Oregon State. But obviously LSU dropped to Alabama last week, which, again, something we didn't talk about. Alabama got a good win there. That was a really good win for Alabama over LSU. And even though they haven't passed Texas yet because Texas is the head-to-head, Alabama's starting to get a pretty decent resume with wins over Ole Miss, LSU, Tennessee. Those are solid wins for the Crimson Tide that will really help them out in the playoff conversation. They can keep winning.
Oh, for sure. Bama's going to need Tennessee to win this Saturday on CBS against Missouri. Speak of the devil, we got Tennessee, Missouri at 13-14. I mean, they're basically going to be fighting for a shot at a New Year's Six bowl.
Yeah. Because Georgia's going to
I
win the
mean,
East. They can't get to the championship game. It's impossible, for that to happen. So it's unfortunate, that they're both eliminated. Missouri fought hard against the Georgia Bulldogs, and I'm glad they didn't fall far. That they didn't fall far in the rankings for the loss, and I think that was accurate of the committee to do that because of the fact that they played such a competitive game. But yeah, Missouri and Tennessee, whoever wins that game definitely can make a New Year's Six bowl game for sure, which for Missouri, even though Tennessee's been bad for a lot of the last 20 years compared to their history, it'd be big for them to get back to another one. Missouri, it would be huge for them to get to a New Year's Six game because no one would have thought that was possible under Eli Drinkwitz last year.
No. I mean, I know I didn't peg them for going to a New Year's Six. I thought they were going to have a terrible, horrible year because their schedule, but, oh well. You get a bad take here and there in the preseason. It is what it is.
Oh, yeah.
But how about Oklahoma
a team
State?
that a lot of people thought in the beginning of the season was bad. Oklahoma State sure turned it around.
Oh, man. I mean, including, those big wins over Kansas, Kansas State, and then this Saturday, the win in the last edition of the Bedlam. I still get mad that game day and bid noon kickoff showed a lot of disrespect to this game. I know there's Bama LSU, but you got the last edition of the Bedlam right at your fingertips. Don't mess it up, gents.
Oh, yeah. The thing is that Oklahoma State looked left for dead. They lost to South Alabama 33-7. And, there was even like Mike Gundy. Is he going to be all the way out? Is he done at Oklahoma State? They didn't have a quarterback figured out. After Spencer Sanders went to Ole Miss, he was very turnover prone, but he still put up a lot of yards. But then they finally settled on Alan Bowman in the Iowa State game. And even though they didn't win that game, they looked better in that game than they did against South Alabama. And ever since that game, they've been playing great football. The Kansas State wins, those already were like, wow, especially the Kansas win. Well, really both, to be honest. Both wins are good. Kansas State's a good team too. Both are good wins. But then you beat Oklahoma, and you not only end Oklahoma's playoff chances, you not only more than likely end Oklahoma's Big 12 title chances, even though Oklahoma can still get there if things break their way. You beat them in the final edition of the rivalry being annual, while Oklahoma's still in your conference. So now Oklahoma State forever in eternity can say, we beat you the last time that we were both in the same conference, unless suddenly somehow Oklahoma State joins the SEC in the future, which I don't know. I don't think the SEC is going to really want the Pokes, even though no disrespect to Oklahoma State. But we'll see what happens with future realignments. You never know. It could happen. You never know.
Maybe the Big 12 should trade for Missouri back, like trade Oklahoma State to the SEC, and in return they get Missouri. That'd be pretty
Missouri
cool.
is not going to want to get moved, man. That's going to be a lot less money they're going to be getting. Once you're in the Big Ten or the SEC, those teams don't want to leave.
True. But it would be pretty nice if that happened in real life. I know it wouldn't, but it'd be cool. But
yeah, maybe Oklahoma State will join the SEC eventually. I hope it happens.
It probably could. Knowing how things are, but Kansas, man, they got disrespected in the preseason. To college football nuts like us, we knew how great Kansas was, how much potential they had this season. Last season, had they been healthier, they'd have been better than 6-7. But they've shown it this year. I said in the preseason they would have a 9-win season, and it looks like they're getting on track for that because this Saturday they got Texas Tech. The week before rivalry week, they're going to have Kansas State, and on rivalry week they got an easy matchup against Cincy. And if they win out, if they go 10-2, they got a shot at being in the top 12 and being in New Year's Six bowl. So they may not be getting in the Big 12 title due to losses to Oklahoma State and Texas. They could be getting into a New Year's Six.
Yeah, that's crazy, man, especially for Kansas with how bad they've been for so long. Lance Leipold's done an incredible job. And you talk about how you didn't expect Missouri to be that good, on some of your takes not always being correct. Well, you pegged Kansas to the T. possibly in a 9-win team. It's looking very likely, man. So you did a really good job there. I thought they'd maybe win 7-8 games, possibly. But I think what's more impressive about it is the fact that Kansas is doing this with Jason Bean. Like, I think a lot of people thought Kansas could be this good with Jalen Daniels, but not with Jason Bean.
I do.
I know a lot of people knew that Jason Bean was solid, when he beat Texas 2 years ago. But that was when Texas was not good back in 2021. But Jason Bean, even though he is more turnover prone than Jalen Daniels, he's done a good job. And it just goes to show you the culture like Lance Leipold's done with those players. He's gotten them to believe, and they're a good team. I mean, are they a top 10 to 15 team in the sport, like on paper, with talent or with anything? No, they're just not. But they're performing, and they're winning games in the Big 12. It's very impressive for sure. And they're ahead of Oklahoma, a team with a lot more talent in the rankings.
Well, that big win over the Boomer Sooners most definitely helps.
Yeah, the head-to-head is definitely like with Texas, Alabama. I mean, Kansas getting the big win. I mean, they should be ranked ahead. And the fact that Oklahoma lost, like I said, when they did lose, I said it was a bad loss. Not because Kansas is a bad team. No disrespect to Kansas, but Oklahoma should have beaten Kansas. Oklahoma was way more talented than Kansas, and they just blew it. They flat out blew it. So it's just one of those things where, talent doesn't win you games automatically. If talent automatically won you games, then A&M would be going to the playoff every year. But they don't. So definitely Kansas is shown. Oklahoma State has shown. Some of these programs have shown. But even Missouri, to an extent, has shown that with less talent, you get the right pieces and you believe you can win games and be in the top 25.
I got one question. Do you think we could see a Kansas-Missouri matchup in a New Year's Six Bowl if Missouri wins out and goes 10-2 and Kansas goes 10-2? I mean, we know they won't be playing each other in the Sugar Bowl because the Sugar Bowl is going to be a playoff game along with the Rose Bowl. But I wonder if we could see a Kansas-Missouri matchup. I mean, it would be lots of money right there. You're putting away lots of money if you don't have that game on the docket.
Oh, yeah, that would be really cool. I mean, obviously, being former, conference rivals in the Big 12, a lot of people would love to see that matchup between two teams that are not normally in a New Year's Six, bowl game. So that would be really cool. And I'm sure basically most of the players would play, if not all of them. You talk about some of these bigger teams where there's so many opt-outs, there's a good chance Kansas, Missouri, most of their players would play, if not all. So that would be really cool to see for sure. So, yeah, it could happen. I mean, if I had to, put a percentage on that, it's probably less than 20%, but you never know, Jackson. The fact that it's possible is really cool to see.
But how about Utah and LSU? I mean, Utah still got a shot at conference play for the second spot. I mean, yeah, they're on the road to Washington, but as we've learned in the past 2 years, never underestimate Utah.
Yeah, that's true. If it was in Rice-Eccles, though, it'd be harder for Washington to win. I know Oregon went on the road and demolished Utah, so you would assume that Washington would do the same because Washington beat Oregon, but that isn't how it works. Oregon is a more complete team. A lot of people have made that point that when you look at Oregon, their defense is better than Washington's, and their offense is comparable to Washington's because Bo Nix and Michael Penix are both put up great stats, and Oregon can run the football just like Washington. You could argue which offense is better. Washington might have a little bit better stats, but Oregon's defense is better, and that's what shut down Utah. So when you talk about this game with Washington, even though it is at Washington, Washington's defense has to prove they can shut down an opponent. They did against Arizona State, but it was Arizona State. If they can do that against Utah, even though Utah doesn't have Cam Rising, I think that would give a lot of people more belief on Washington being a team that could win a title. Because I think a lot of people think Washington's really good, but I don't think a lot of people think Washington's title material because they don't have a great defense. And Utah, we'll see if they can exploit it. If they had Cam Rising, they could, would have had a better shot of being able to beat Washington. And if it was in Rice-Eccles, it would be better as well. And maybe they still could. I mean, there's a shot, but it's going to be a lot harder without them. But, yeah, Utah's still alive. If they can get a big win over Washington for the Pac-12 title game, that'd be really cool. But I think it's awesome Utah's still having as good of a season as they are without Cam Rising because a lot more teams would have had a worse season.
Well, and then we got LSU coming off that big loss against the Alabama Crimson Tide. I mean, we've had some noisy people saying that we got some questions about Bama and LSU.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, LSU. I mean, a lot of people say that they could have won if Jane Daniels didn't get injured, but Alabama was already up by 14. But LSU is a good team on offense, but their defense did let them down this year. Their defense gave up way too many yards and points. They're kind of like USC, really, in a way.
Yeah.
Their defense is probably better than USC's, but really, though, I mean, LSU had a good team. Jay Daniels put up ridiculous stats like Caleb Williams, but their defense let them down, and that's why they have 3 losses. And obviously, they're in the tough SEC, and they lost the Florida State game. But they're a good team. I'm glad they're still ranked, even though they have 3 losses, because they have a good team, and they got the big one over Missouri. But, yeah, LSU defense is why they have 3 losses for sure.
Yeah, they should be able to rebound nicely against the Florida Gators this Saturday. I mean, Georgia State and Texas A&M, they look to be pretty easy because, I mean, I know A&M doesn't look that easy, but at the same time, it's kind of like a seesaw battle. I mean, if it's in Baton Rouge, LSU's going to win. If it's in College Station, Texas A&M's going to win.
Troy V says, because of Jackson, I can't say LSU without wanting to say LSU. Thanks, Jackson. Yeah, you got the LSU. Remember, we were doing it with every team. OS who, who, everybody. Anyone that ends with a U, you can just put who on it. But yeah, LSU sounds the best.
There you go.
Oh, that's a good one.
Well, then we got Notre Dame.
Both these teams with 3 losses, they've been connected in the rankings because they both lose a game at the same time.
Oof. Like, I think Notre Dame is out of New Year's Six bowl contention with that loss to Clemson. I mean, that battle against Clemson last Saturday, I mean, the defense saved Notre Dame. Had it not been for that Notre Dame defense, I think it would have been a lot worse than 31-23. It'd have been more like 35-17 for Clemson.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's a shame that you talk about a team like LSU or USC that their defense let them down. Well, Notre Dame's offense let them down. Notre Dame, with a 6-year quarterback in Sam Hartman and loads of talent, especially on the ground. People talked about their ground game. Audric Estime and some of their other running backs, that they'd be really good. And they've been okay running the ball, but they haven't been like one of the best running teams in college football, which I think part of it's because their passing attack never really developed to the extent that people thought that it would, and having a better passing attack opens up the ground game. And I don't think Notre Dame's offensive line really helped them out either. Notre Dame's receivers, they don't get a lot of separation. So Notre Dame's offense is why they have 3 losses. With the way Clemson's been playing, I know Clemson's still talented, but Notre Dame should have won that game. Notre Dame, if they wanted to prove, to your point, Jackson, of being a New Year's Six, type of team, you can't lose to Clemson the way Clemson is this year, being 5-4. That takes them out of that, conversation. They're probably just going to get a pretty solid bowl game, probably like on a, December 30th, December 31st kind of deal, or whatever day, that a bowl that's not New Year's Six is going to be on. It's going to be a good bowl game, but it's not going to be what Notre Dame fans wanted. And they just ended up having an average season compared to, I think, what a lot of people thought that they could do with Sam Hartman.
Yeah. But it will be pretty fun to see the awkwardness between Sam Hartman and Wake Forest a week from now.
100% to Georgia.
How about
Hartman's been disappointment? They got mediocre wideouts as well. I completely agree. That sums it up to a T. And you are right, Jack. It's going to be wild them playing Wake Forest, his old team.
For sure. How about Arizona? They've had a magnificent jump this season. I mean, they lost tight one to Mississippi State, and they got a close loss to Washington, but that triple overtime loss to USC. But, they showed Washington State, gave them the what for. They gave Oregon State, UCLA the what for. And, if they win out the rest of the season against Colorado this Saturday, then Utah, then Arizona State, they got a shot possibly at a second spot in the Pac-12 title game if certain things go their way. Although it would help if USC lost out for them, though.
Yeah, it's crazy with Arizona, how good that they've, been lately after the start of the season, where they, looked like a team that was going to be poor like they've been the last few years. I mean, Arizona hasn't been relevant since Khalil Tate, when they had the season where he was Mr. October for a month and he was playing great football, then they trailed off. And then before that, 2014 with Rich Rod, I mean, they have not been a good football team in a while. And then, again, start of the season didn't look very good. And then they make a QB change. Jane Delora's out, Noah Fafita's in, and all of a sudden, Arizona, they were competitive against USC. They got, a couple really big wins in the Pac-12 last couple. I mean, UCLA, they dominated in this past week. It wasn't even a close game. It's not like it went down to the wire, and they barely won. They dominated UCLA. They got the win over Oregon State. Arizona's just been very impressive. They've been a really surprising team compared to the way that they started at the beginning of the season. I think Arizona and Oklahoma State have rebounded harder than almost any other team in college football from where they were at like week 2 or week 3 of the season. Arizona, Oklahoma State, it's been very impressive. Jed Fish doing a good job down there. Noah Fafita, probably the quarterback of the future. The way he's playing for next year and beyond, Arizona looking really good. And it's awesome to see a team that's been struggling for a while finally have a good season.
Yeah. But how about Iowa? I mean, they look like they're they're gonna be the ones having the hot potato for the Big Ten West. I mean, I think Wisconsin lost to Indiana because they're like, oh, never mind, we're gonna lose this game. Nebraska, you want the?
I kind of would like
West?
to think that Indiana did a good job and that Wisconsin didn't blow it. I would kind of like to think IU at least played a bit of a part in it.
I mean, I'd be going down too if I knew what was ahead of me. I mean, Michigan, Ohio State in the Big Ten title game. I'm like, no, thank you. Iowa, you take it. No. I think Nebraska should take it. No. I think Minnesota should.
Yeah, Minnesota threw it against Illinois. Wisconsin threw it against Indiana. Nebraska threw it against Michigan State. All three of those teams lost, and then you got Iowa out there beating Northwestern 10-7. That's life in the Big Ten West. Somebody's gonna win.
In Wrigley Field, I mean, that Iowa Rutgers game, I wonder what that's gonna bring. I mean, are we gonna see some drama there, or are we gonna see Cooper DeJean bail out Iowa like he did against Michigan State?
Yeah. I mean, this season is just really showing how bad the West is, though. I mean, the Big Ten West and the Big Ten East are completely different. I mean, when you've got one of the best teams in the West, Wisconsin, losing to a lot of people's mind the worst team in the East in Indiana, that's not good. It's just not a good look. So, yeah, the West has just been poor, and Iowa, if they do win the West, which is looking like it right now, yeah, they're not going to have a shot against Ohio State or Michigan. I mean, there's just no way. It is going to be an ugly game more than likely.
Knowing Iowa, they could blow their opportunity at the West Division with a loss against Nebraska. So, I mean,
yeah, I would be a bit surprised.
Because, I mean, well, and before that, they got Illinois, which that should be an easy win for Iowa.
They lost to them last year 9-6. I mean, you talk about an easy win for Iowa. I mean, they beat Northwestern 10-7. That's true. Like if a comfortable win for Iowa is if it's like 17-7. Because 10-7 to me is close. It's tight. I mean, there's not much difference between 9-6 the other way to 10-7 going in your favor. There's not much of a difference. But I know what you mean. Iowa should beat Illinois, but it's probably going to be a low-scoring game like all of them are.
Yeah. But we got Tulane at 23. Right now, they look like they're going to be the Group of 5 representative for New Year's 6, unless James Madison gets approved by the NCAA, which we could see that happen soon.
James Madison should be able to play. James Madison should not be, disqualified from a bowl game because they made the transition over. I mean, they're undefeated. They can't even be ranked in the poll. They will not rank them in the CFP poll because they're not able to make a bowl, which is insane. I mean, they've done their job. They transitioned over. They're undefeated, playing great football, and then you don't even let them play in a bowl game. It doesn't even matter if they lose a game. They still should be able to play in a bowl game if they're 11-1. I mean, it's just insane. It's a terrible rule, but it is what it is. Hopefully that does get changed, but as of now, it doesn't look like it, but you never know. To your point with Tulane, Jackson, I was really shocked that they barely beat ECU. ECU's terrible. They're not last year's ECU with Holton Ahlers, Keith Mitchell, CJ Johnson. This is a much worse ECU team with only one win. And Tulane won 13-10 with Michael Pratt. It's not like Michael Pratt was out. No, it was with Michael Pratt, and they won 13-10. As they always say, a win is a win, but that was a bad performance from Tulane. And I thought it'd be enough to drop them out of the poll, but the CFP voters kept them in.
Yeah, I mean, they got to have somebody be the Group of 5 representative. I mean, Tulane, I mean, they still get some respect. Yeah, I mean, they got smacked by Army. I wonder if Liberty's ever going to get a shot in the rankings. I mean, I know Liberty's got easy peasy schedule, but being unbeaten's got to count for something.
Yeah, they're undefeated. They're undefeated, obviously, and they're in the AP poll at 25, but they're not in this one. I guess the voters, like to your point, the resume is just too weak. But yeah, somebody's got to be there. If Tulane wins out, it will probably be them. But Tulane obviously isn't as good as they were last year with no Tajay Spears. North Carolina at number 24, and all they had to do was blow out Campbell. Not Campbell Soup, but Campbell, the football team, 59-7. And they destroyed them. And, yeah, I mean, it was a byproduct of other teams losing for North Carolina to get ranked again.
Yeah.
But, man, if they didn't lose to Georgia Tech and Virginia, how high would they be? They'd be in the top 10 right now. They were number 10 when they lost to Virginia. It's insane. North Carolina really blew their season there. But if they do win out, they can still, get a pretty good bowl game.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they got Duke this Saturday in Chapel Hill. And week 12, week before rivalry week, they got they got to go to Clemson. And on rivalry week, they got North Carolina State. I mean,
not easy.
Drake May can't save them forever.
Yeah, if their defense had been better this year, they're kind of, again, like LSU and USC. If their defense had been better, they would have had a better season, but they let them down.
Yeah. Well, then we got K-State at the last spot, the defending Big 12 champs. They lost a tight one to the Texas Longhorns.
Should have had a good shot to win. I know why they went for it. I know. One play and you win the game, but they didn't get it, and then they ended up losing. Kansas State's usually competitive with Oklahoma, and they usually can beat them. They were very competitive with Texas. They had a really good shot to win, and I'm glad the CFP voters kept them ranked. It's not like the AP poll where they fell out. They're still ranked here because that was not a bad loss. They were very competitive, and they looked like one of the 25 best teams in the country with the way they played against Texas. Even though Quinn Ewers was out for Texas, it was still a good performance from K-State.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wanting to see if Kansas State can possibly get that second spot. But if they do, they're going to have to beat the bare necessities this Saturday. They're going to have to beat Kansas, and they'll have to beat Iowa State. And they need a lot. They're going to need OK State to lose 2 of the 3 games in the final stretch of the season. I mean, Central Florida is looking like a possible trap game for Oklahoma State because, I mean, it's like I said before in the preseason and throughout the regular season, Gus Malzahn leading Central Florida, they're always a Jekyll and Hyde team, especially in the Big 12. I've warned Big 12 people about this year. I'm like, you got a Jekyll and Hyde team in your conference.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the whole Big 12's been Jekyll and Hyde. They've been very tough to figure out for sure. Outside of Cincinnati, who's lost every single game. All the other teams, they can surprise you one week and then just completely fall apart the next. So it's very hard to figure out. But those are the top 25 teams and the CFP rankings. Obviously there's a few other teams you can make an argument that could be in there, I'm sure, as always. Yeah, that's why Mark always says it's not much difference between 25 and 26, and he is absolutely right. But these are the top 25 teams that the voters did. I agree with them keeping the top 8 the same because all of them did win. But do you have any final thoughts, Jackson?
Well, I'm just ready to see some big matchups coming up this Saturday. And, you can check us out on YouTube and on Twitter, where we go over our takes on what's going on in the college football world, NFL world, amongst other things. Of course, you can check out Jeffrey. He's got some great videos, great content. Love his content about Jimbo Fisher. That's pretty funny, man. And now it's been a year ago since you posted a video about it. And yesterday you posted a video. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, maybe a year from now I'll be doing another one. Another update in the Jimbo Fisher saga. But definitely, that's going to be interesting. Sean Garner, I appreciate you for being here. He said any StreamYard tonight. We just kind of wanted to keep this a shorter stream, maybe in a future week. If we do it again, we definitely probably will have the StreamYard link back open. But do appreciate you for being here, Sean Garner. And definitely can't wait to talk to you in the future for sure. Really appreciate it. And appreciate you as well for being here, Troy V. Definitely, it was awesome having both of you guys in the chat. But it's going to be awesome this week in college football. Can't wait to talk to you guys in the future. We'll do the StreamYard link. Just definitely keeping it short tonight. But appreciate it for being here, Sean. It was a lot of fun. That Michigan-Penn State game is going to be big for the CFP rankings coming up next week and beyond, and some of the other big games. But really appreciate you for being here, everybody. Subscribe to Jackson's channel and Only Talk Sports, my channel as well, and like the streams down below. Appreciate you guys for being